The mechanic wiped grease from his hands as the CEO's voice cut through the workshop. Cold, loud, final. You're done. Pack up. Now. In front of everyone, the hard-working father was fired like he meant nothing. He didn't argue. He didn't shout. He only asked, quietly, for one more shift. His daughter needed medicine tonight. The CEO turned away without a glance. Then the ground began to tremble. Outside, a Navy helicopter descended. A voice thundered through the air. We're here for Lieutenant Commander Raven 6. Time froze. Who was the man they just fired? Jack Turner's days began before sunrise and ended long after the lights in the shop went dark. Grease lived under his fingernails, exhaustion in his bones. He didn't complain. He never did. He just worked, quietly, steadily, like a man who had no room for weakness. At the garage, Jack was invisible, the kind of mechanic people relied on but rarely noticed. He fixed engines others gave up on, took the late shifts no one wanted, covered for coworkers without asking for credit. When the younger guys laughed too loud or the managers barked orders, Jack just nodded and went back to his tools. Everything he did was for Ellie. Ellie was 8 years old, small for her age, with bright eyes that hid how hard breathing could sometimes be. Chronic asthma had turned her life into a careful balance of inhalers, hospital visits, and nights when Jack slept in a chair beside her bed, listening to every breath like it was a countdown. Her medicine wasn't cheap. Neither were the doctor visits. So Jack worked brutal shifts, 12, sometimes 14 hours, his back screaming, hands aching, lungs filled with metal dust and oil fumes. Every extra hour meant one more refill. One more night, Ellie could sleep without coughing herself awake. Their apartment was tiny. The paint peeled. The heater worked only when it felt like it. But to Ellie, it was magical. Jack turned cardboard boxes into castles. Old wrenches became space tools. On the nights when money was tight, dinner became a picnic on the floor, complete with silly voices and made-up stories. And when Ellie looked up at him, inhaler in her hand, she always said the same thing with complete faith. Dad, you know everything. Jack would smile, kiss her forehead, and lie just enough to protect her. Because as long as Ellie believed that, he could carry the rest alone. Vivian Helios did not inherit her power. She fought for it. At 34, she was the youngest CEO Helios Automotive Solutions had ever appointed. The headlines called her brilliant. The board called her temporary. And the investors? They watched her like hawks, waiting for the smallest mistake so they could say what they'd been thinking all along. She's too young. Too soft. Not ready. Vivian felt that pressure every single day. Her office overlooked the shop floor, a wall of glass separating her from the noise, the grease, the men who worked with their hands. She believed leadership meant distance, control, precision, because in her world, compassion had always been labeled a weakness. She learned that lesson early. Her father, a former executive himself, had drilled it into her as a child. Never hesitate. Never bend. The moment people sense empathy, they exploit it. And when she climbed the corporate ladder, she followed that rule with absolute discipline. Mistakes were not learning moments. They were liabilities. So Vivian ruled with policies, metrics, and zero tolerance. Every procedure at Helios Automotive had a code. Every repair had a protocol. Deviations weren't innovation. They were risks. Risks led to lawsuits. Lawsuits led to headlines. Headlines led to boardroom executions. And Vivian could not afford that. That morning, she was already on edge. An investor call had gone poorly. One board member had questioned her command presence. Another had suggested a more seasoned executive might better guide the company through turbulent quarters. Seasoned, Vivian knew, was just another word for not you. She stepped on the shop floor with her heels clicking sharply against concrete, followed by two supervisors who trailed behind her like nervous shadows. The mechanics straightened instantly. Conversations died. Tools paused mid-motion. That's when she saw Jack Turner. He was crouched beside a delivery truck, using a modified torque sequence, an old-school method that didn't appear in Helios' standardized repair manual. It was subtle. Most wouldn't have noticed. Vivian did. "What is that?" she demanded. Jack looked up, startled. He stood quickly, wiping his hands on his coveralls. Ma'am, the bolt threading on this model's been warped. Standard torque will shear it. This way keeps the engine stable. He spoke respectfully, calmly. No attitude. Vivian didn't hear experience. She heard risk. Is that method approved? She asked. No, ma'am. Jack answered honestly. But I've used it for years. Never had a failure. Years. That word hit something sharp inside her. Years meant habits. Old habits. Uncontrolled habits. Shut it down, she said coldly. You don't freelance repairs here. Jack hesitated, just a fraction. Please, let me finish the shift. I'll log the repair. I can explain. The supervisors exchanged glances. The shop went silent. Vivian felt eyes on her back. From the glass office above. From a man below. From a board that wasn't even in the room, but always present in her mind. Do not bend. She raised her voice so everyone could hear. You violated protocol. That's grounds for immediate termination. Jack's face drained of color. Ma'am, he said quietly, swallowing hard, I've never missed a safety check. My daughter, she needs her medicine tonight. Just one shift. I'll accept the write-up. Anything. For half a second, just half, Vivian saw something else in his eyes. Not defiance. Fear. But fear made people unpredictable. And unpredictable people endanger companies. I'm not running a charity, she replied, the words sharp enough to hurt. Security will escort you out. The sentence landed like a verdict. Jack didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He simply nodded, removed his gloves, and placed them carefully on the workbench, the way a man does when he knows there's no appeal left. As he walked past her, Vivian didn't look at his face. She looked at the rules she had upheld. She told herself it was necessary. She told herself it was leadership. But as Jack stepped outside, unaware that history was seconds away from arriving by helicopter, a quiet question lingered, one Vivian refused to ask. Had she just protected the company, or exposed everything wrong with her power? The shop didn't feel the same after Jack Turner was fired. Machines still hummed. Air compressors still hissed. Wrenches still clanked against steel. But something steady had been removed, like a bolt no one noticed until the vibration started. The mechanics gathered in small pockets, voices low, eyes drifting toward the bay where Jack had worked for years. That wasn't right, someone muttered. Guy saved my engine last winter, another said. Did it just by listening. They all knew Jack was different. They just hadn't known how different. Jack didn't read engines. He listened to them. He'd stand with his eyes closed, head tilted, fingers resting lightly on the hood while the motor idled. 10 seconds. Sometimes less. Timing's off by a hair. Fuel mix is too rich. Cylinder 3's gonna fail in a week. And he was almost never wrong. You'd think someone like that would brag. Or at least explain. Jack never did. His toolbox was another oddity. Unlike the dented, sticker-covered boxes the rest of the crew dragged around, Jack's was compact, matte black, and sealed tight. Military-grade alloy, impact-resistant corners, numbered compartments etched instead of labeled. No one had ever seen him buy it. No one had ever seen him replace a tool. He locked it every night. Not out of secrecy, out of habit. Then there was his calm. When a hydraulic lift failed and a truck slammed down inches from crushing a man's leg, panic erupted. Shouting, swearing, chaos. Jack didn't shout. He moved. 3 steps. One hand signal. A quiet command. Kill the power. Now. The room obeyed before anyone realized why. Afterward, when the adrenaline wore off and hands started shaking, Jack just returned to work like nothing had happened. It was the older mechanic, Frank Delgado, who finally said what everyone else was thinking. Frank had worked engines longer than most people had been alive. Vietnam-era Navy, though he rarely talked about it. He watched Jack from across the shop, eyes narrowing, memories stirring. One afternoon, as Jack packed his tools in silence after being fired, Frank walked over slowly. That toolbox, Frank said quietly, nodding toward the black case. You know those don't sell at hardware stores. Jack didn't look up. Special warfare used those exact latches, Frank continued. Saltwater resistant. Airdrop rated. Only saw him on Navy birds. Jack's hands paused for just a moment. Then they kept moving. Just tools, Jack replied. Frank studied him. The posture, the stillness, the way Jack always stood with his back to the wall. the way his eyes tracked exits without effort. Yeah, Frank said softly. That's what we always call them, too. Jack carried the toolbox out to his truck, the weight familiar, grounding. He placed it in the back, then sat behind the wheel without turning the key. And the memories came anyway. Not as images, as sensations. The scream of rotors cutting through black sky. The metallic taste of adrenaline. The pressure of night vision goggles against his face. At home, he reached for a box hidden in the back of his closet. Inside, beneath Ellie's old drawings and folded hospital bills, was a single photograph. Jack in a flight suit. Younger. Harder. Standing beside a helicopter, helmet under his arm. The name patch read, Raven 6. He turned the photo face down. Not because he was ashamed, but because remembering hurt more than forgetting ever could. Ellie's voice drifted from the living room. Dad, can you help me breathe? Jack closed the box gently and went to her, kneeling beside her bed, counting her breaths, steady and calm, just like he had always done. Because whatever he had been before, the only mission that mattered now was keeping his daughter alive. And outside, miles away, a Navy operations center had just finished running a name through a database. A name that hadn't been spoken out loud in years. Lieutenant Commander. Call sign, Raven 6. The mystery was no longer hidden. It was inbound. The pharmacy lights were too bright. They always were at night. Harsh, unforgiving, buzzing faintly above the aisles like they were impatient with human weakness. Jack stood at the counter, Ellie perched on his hip, her small chest rising and falling too fast. Each breath came with a thin, frightening whistle. The inhaler sat on the counter between them. So close. So expensive. The cashier cleared her throat gently. I'm sorry, sir. With insurance, it's still $40 short. 40. Jack felt the number settle into his bones. He reached into his wallet anyway, as if the extra bills might appear if he looked hard enough. Receipts. A faded photo of Ellie. 2 crumpled 20s already spoken for. Ellie coughed. Hard. Her fingers clutched his collar. Dad, it's getting tight. Jack turned her slightly, rubbing slow circles on her back, counting her breaths like he'd done 100 times before. In through the nose. Out through the mouth. Stay calm. Panic steals air. I've got you, he whispered, though his heart was racing. Just keep looking at me, okay? The line behind them had grown quiet. A woman covered her mouth. An older man stepped forward, then hesitated. No one wanted to intrude or admit they were watching a child struggle to breathe over $40. I can put it back, Jack said quietly to the cashier. The words tasted like defeat. We'll try again tomorrow. Ellie shook her head weakly. Dad, please. Jack's jaw tightened. He lowered his voice. Sweetheart, I need you to stay calm for me. But her breaths were getting shorter. Sharper. Fear was winning. A man in the back of the store fumbled with his phone. Should we call an ambulance? Jack nodded once. Please. Outside, somewhere beyond the glass doors, a deep, distant thump rolled through the air. At first, no one noticed. Then the windows began to vibrate. The sound grew louder, rhythmic, powerful, unmistakable. Whomp, whomp, whomp. Jack's shoulders stiffened. Not in fear, in recognition. The automatic doors slid open as wind blasted through the pharmacy, knocking over a cardboard display. Dust swirled. Conversations died mid-sentence. A Navy helicopter descended into the parking lot like a controlled storm. Ellie looked up, eyes wide even through her struggle. Dad, what's that? Jack closed his eyes for half a second. Then he turned. 2 uniformed Navy officers rushed inside, boots striking tile with purpose. Their eyes scanned the room until they found him. Grease-stained jacket, worn boots, holding a frightened child. They stopped. Both officers snapped to attention. Lieutenant Commander Turner, one said clearly, loudly enough for everyone to hear. Sir, we need you. The world seemed to tilt. The cashier froze. The crowd gasped. Phones came up. The word lieutenant hung in the air like something holy and impossible. Jack didn't move. Not here, he said quietly. My daughter can't breathe. The officer followed his gaze to Ellie. Without hesitation, he reached into his vest and handed over a sealed inhaler. Use this, sir. Jack administered it with practiced precision. Counted, waited, coached Ellie through the breaths. Slowly, blessedly, the wheeze softened. Her chest loosened. Her eyes cleared. She inhaled fully. The room exhaled with her. Jack handed the inhaler back. "Thank you. Keep it," the officer said. On the Navy, Ellie looked between them, confused. "Dad, why are they calling you that?" Jack opened his mouth to answer, but didn't get the chance. "Sir," the second officer said urgently, "we lost a pilot during a training run. Radar interference. We've exhausted standard search grids. Command says you're the only one who's done this before." Jack closed his eyes again. The pass knocked hard. "Show me," he said. They spread a tablet on the pharmacy counter. Live radar, wind vectors, terrain overlays. Everyone watched as Jack's demeanor changed. Posture straightening, eyes sharpening, voice steady. He scanned the data for seconds, not minutes. "There," he said, pointing. "Dead zone between these ridges." He ditched to avoid civilian airspace. He'll be signaling off-cycle to conserve power. The officers stared. "Adjust bearing 12 degrees west. Drop altitude by 200. You'll see him." They ran. Outside, the helicopter lifted again, rotors screaming into the night. Minutes passed like hours. Ellie tugged Jack's sleeve. "Dad, do you save people?" Jack knelt, meeting her eyes. "I used to help people find their way home." A crackle echoed from the tablet. Then a voice. Visual confirmed. Pilot located. Alive. The pharmacy erupted. Applause. Tears. Shaking heads in disbelief. Ellie smiled, proud, wide, unafraid. She wrapped her arms around his neck. "My dad's a hero," she said softly. Jack held her close, eyes wet, as the truth finally landed. Not with force, but with grace. He hadn't lost who he was. He'd just been waiting for the moment it mattered most. The next morning, the story was everywhere. CEO fired a Navy hero. Then a helicopter revealed his secret identity. Social media blew up. Videos of the helicopter landing outside the pharmacy. The Navy officers addressing Jack by rank. Ellie clutching her inhaler. Every frame shared, commented on, and reshared. The comments weren't kind to Vivian Helios. Hashtag trended. Hashtag fired hero. Hashtag so fail. Hashtag justice for Jack. Customers threatened boycotts. Investors demanded answers. The boardroom that had once celebrated her iron fist now whispered doubts. Vivian woke to notifications that never seemed to end. She scrolled through the coverage, each clip piercing her with growing unease. And then she saw it. The data Jack had trusted, the method she had condemned. 98% success rate. Better than the standardized protocol she'd so rigidly enforced. Her stomach twisted. Her pride, the armor she'd built since childhood, was cracking. Every instinct that told her rules meant control now rang hollow. She had punished the wrong man. Not a negligent mechanic. Not a liability. But a hero. A father. A man carrying burdens she couldn't even begin to imagine. Meanwhile, the Navy quietly confirmed what the world now celebrated. Jack Turner, call sign Raven 6, had saved 14 lives during missions, lost 3, and carried the weight of every single one on his shoulders. He never boasted, never sought medals. The guilt he bore was private, carried quietly beneath grease-stained coveralls and late-night shifts for his daughter. Vivian couldn't ignore the truth. She drove to Jack's modest home, rehearsing words that wouldn't come easily. The street was quiet, Christmas lights flickering faintly in neighboring windows. She knocked. Jack opened the door. The fatigue in his eyes was familiar. The warmth of his smile, unchanged. Ellie peeked from behind him, inhaler in hand. Vivian started, faltering. "I made a mistake. A terrible one. I saw you as a liability, not a person. Not a father. Not a hero." Jack regarded her quietly. He didn't raise his voice, didn't lecture. He simply let the words hang. "I want to understand," she continued. "I want to see what I didn't see before." And for the first time, Vivian saw him. Not the mechanic she had dismissed. Not the anomaly she had feared. She saw Jack Turner, a man whose quiet strength saved lives, whose sacrifices ran deeper than she could comprehend, whose integrity never faltered even when the world had failed him. Humility settled over her like a tide. She realized power without understanding was arrogance. Control without empathy was cruelty. And the lesson she'd ignored for years now stood in her doorway, flesh and bone, a living reminder of what true leadership could be. She extended a hand, and Jack took it, not with anger, not with pride, but with the calm dignity of a man who had carried far more than she ever would. Outside, the Navy helicopter hovered in the distance, rotors beating a steady rhythm, a quiet tribute to the man who always acted with courage, whether anyone knew it or not. Vivian left that day transformed. She returned to her boardroom not as a tyrant, but as a leader who had finally learned that humility, accountability, and respect were far more powerful than any protocol. Jack went back to his daughter, to his garage, to the life he loved quietly and fiercely. The world now knew the truth. And for once, the man in grease-stained coveralls didn't need to hide the weight of his heroism. Because sometimes, the people we dismiss are the ones who remind us what real strength truly looks like. Jack Turner was quietly reinstated, promoted, and finally able to secure consistent medical care for Ellie. Vivian Helios publicly admitted her mistake, reshaping company culture to value empathy alongside efficiency. Jack accepted the recognition, not for glory, but for his daughter, for the simple act of keeping her safe. Heroes don't always wear uniforms. Sometimes they wear grease-stained coveralls. Sometimes they count coins to buy medicine. Sometimes they choose family over fame. And sometimes, true honor doesn't seek applause. It shows up quietly when someone needs saving.